Excuse me. What is that disgusting thing attached to your baby? Patricia Henderson screamed, her face twisted with rage as she stared at my 3-week-old daughter's feeding tube. Before I could stop her, she grabbed the medical equipment and yanked it violently from Emma's tiny body. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. I stopped dead in my tracks, my 3-week-old daughter Emma sleeping peacefully in her stroller. The voice belonged to Patricia Henderson, our HOA president, a woman everyone called HOA Karen behind her back. She stood there in her navy blazer, clipboard in hand, her face twisted with disgust as she stared at Emma's feeding tube. It's a feeding tube, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. My daughter has a medical condition. Patricia's perfectly styled blonde hair seemed to bristle with rage. I don't care what it is. It's unsightly and disturbing. This is a family neighborhood, not a hospital. Are you seriously complaining about my baby's medical equipment? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'm complaining about you parading around with that thing in public. It's lowering our property values and frightening other residents. My hands gripped the stroller handle tighter. Emma stirred slightly, her tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. Born with esophageal atresia, this feeding tube was her lifeline, the only way she could receive nutrition. Patricia, this is my daughter. She needs this tube to survive. Well, she shouldn't be out here scaring people with her condition. Keep her inside where she belongs. I stopped, my heart already sinking. Good morning, Patricia. How can I help you? Her eyes immediately went to Emma's stroller, and I saw her face twist with disgust. What is that thing attached to your baby? It's a feeding tube, I explained patiently, though my jaw was already clenching. Emma has a medical condition that requires it. Patricia's face turned red. I don't care what it is. It's unsightly and disturbing to other residents. This is a family neighborhood, not a hospital. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Are you seriously complaining about my baby's medical equipment? I'm complaining about the fact that you're parading around with that thing in public. It's lowering our property values and creating a disturbing atmosphere. My hands gripped the stroller handle tighter. Patricia, this is my daughter. She needs this tube to survive. Well, she shouldn't be out here frightening other residents with her condition. Keep her inside where she belongs. The words hit me like a physical blow. I looked down at Emma, sleeping peacefully in her pale pink onesie, unaware that someone was calling her a frightening sight. This innocent little girl who had already fought so hard just to be alive, spending her first week in the NICU, undergoing surgery at just 5 days old, and now finally healthy enough for short walks. You have no right to tell me where I can take my daughter, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. I have every right. Patricia's voice grew shrill. I'm the HOA president, and I'm telling you that this display is unacceptable. Either remove that thing or go back inside immediately. Other neighbors had started to gather, watching the confrontation unfold like a car accident they couldn't look away from. Mrs. Chin from next door looked horrified, her morning coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips. The Millers from across the street stopped their morning jog to stare, their faces showing disbelief. Even old Mr. Peterson, who rarely left his house, had come out to his porch to see what the commotion was about. I'm not going anywhere, I said firmly, placing my hand protectively on Emma's stroller. This is a public sidewalk and my daughter has every right to be here. Patricia's face turned purple with rage, the veins in her neck standing out prominently. How dare you defy me? I've been keeping this neighborhood pristine for 15 years. I'll have you fined for this violation. I'll have you evicted from this community. On what grounds? I challenged, feeling the anger building in my chest like a volcano ready to erupt. On the grounds that you're creating a public nuisance with your sick child. You're disturbing the peace and diminishing the quality of life for normal families. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Several neighbors gasped audibly. Mrs. Chin actually dropped her coffee cup, the ceramic shattering on her driveway. Young Tommy Miller, who was maybe 8 years old, tugged on his mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mommy, why is that lady being mean about the baby?" I felt my entire body shake with rage, but I forced myself to stay calm for Emma's sake. My daughter was still sleeping, her tiny fist curled against her cheek, completely unaware of the hatred being spewed in her direction. Patricia, I'm going to ask you one more time to leave us alone, I said through gritted teeth. Or what? You'll call the police? She laughed, a harsh sound that made Emma stir slightly. They'll side with me. I donate to their annual fund. I organize their community appreciation dinners. You're just some new resident who thinks he can disrupt our established way of life. She stepped closer to the stroller, her face twisted with malice. The smell of her overwhelming perfume mixed with the scent of hairspray created a cloud of artificial fragrance that made me nauseous. Maybe I should call child services instead, she continued, her voice dripping with venom. A parent who parades around with a sick baby like some kind of freak show doesn't deserve to be a parent. That child should be in an institution where she belongs. That's when I saw her reach toward Emma's feeding tube with her perfectly manicured fingers. Don't you dare touch my daughter, I warned, but Patricia was already leaning over the stroller, her face inches from Emma's peaceful form. I'm going to remove this disgusting thing right now, she snarled. If you won't hide it, I'll make sure it's gone. No. I shouted, lunging forward, but it was too late. Patricia grabbed the feeding tube with both hands and yanked it hard. The tube, which had been carefully inserted by medical professionals and secured with medical tape, came loose with a sickening pop. Emma woke up screaming, her tiny face turning bright red with pain and confusion. Blood immediately began flowing from the site where the tube had been violently removed. What have you done? I roared, immediately checking on Emma. The feeding site was bleeding profusely, and my daughter was crying in a way I'd never heard before, a sound of pure agony that cut through my heart like a knife. Patricia stepped back, suddenly realizing the magnitude of what she'd done. Her hands were shaking and there was blood on her fingers. I didn't mean to. I just wanted. You didn't mean to what? You just assaulted my newborn baby. You ripped out her feeding tube. The gathered neighbors erupted in angry shouts. Mrs. Chun was already on her phone calling 911, her voice shaking as she spoke to the dispatcher. The Millers were recording everything on their phones, their faces showing absolute horror. She's bleeding. Mrs. Chin cried out. That poor baby is bleeding everywhere. I carefully lifted Emma from the stroller, trying to apply gentle pressure to the feeding site with a clean burp cloth while she screamed. Blood was soaking through the cloth at an alarming rate. It's okay, sweetheart. Daddy's here. Daddy's here. I was just trying to help the community, Patricia stammered, but her voice lacked conviction. She was staring at the blood on her hands as if she couldn't believe what she'd done. Help? You just ripped a medical device out of a 3-week-old baby. Mr. Miller shouted, his voice breaking with emotion. Are you completely insane? Other neighbors began emerging from their houses, drawn by the commotion and Emma's heart-wrenching cries. Soon there was a crowd of 20 people surrounding us, all staring at Patricia with disgust and horror. Some were crying, others were shouting, and a few were trying to help by bringing clean towels and water. Someone call an ambulance. I called out, my voice breaking as Emma's cries grew weaker, which terrified me even more than the loud crying. Already done, Mrs. Chin replied, her voice shaking. They're on their way. 83 minutes. Patricia tried to regain her composure, straightening her blazer and fixing her hair. Now everyone just calm down. I'm sure the baby is fine. It's just a little tube. Children are resilient. A little tube? Mrs. Rodriguez, a pediatric nurse who lived 3 houses down, pushed through the crowd. That's a G-tube. Do you have any idea what you've done to this child? She knelt beside me, examining Emma with professional eyes. Her face went pale as she assessed the damage. We need to get her to the hospital immediately. The site could get infected and she's lost her feeding access. This is serious medical trauma. I didn't know it was that important, Patricia said weakly, but her excuse sounded hollow even to her own ears. You didn't know because you didn't care to know. Mrs. Rodriguez snapped. You saw a baby with medical equipment and decided to play doctor. You could have killed her. Mrs. Anderson, an elderly woman from down the street, was crying openly. How could you hurt a baby? How could anyone hurt an innocent baby? The sound of sirens filled the air, first the ambulance, then police cars. As the paramedics rushed toward us with their equipment, I heard Patricia trying to slip away through the crowd. Where do you think you're going? Officer Martinez, who had just arrived, blocked her path with his imposing frame. I need to get home. I have important HOA business to attend to. The quarterly meeting is tomorrow. The only business you have right now is explaining why you assaulted a baby. I didn't assault anyone. I was just trying to maintain community standards. This neighborhood has rules. The paramedic, a kind-faced woman named Janet with 20 years of experience, carefully took Emma from my arms. What happened here? She ripped out my daughter's feeding tube, I explained, my voice barely steady as I watched Emma's blood on Janet's gloves. Janet's expression darkened as she examined Emma. This is going to require emergency surgery to repair. The tube was torn out so violently that it damaged the stoma site and surrounding tissue. Surgery? My heart stopped. Is she going to be okay? We need to get her to Children's Hospital immediately. The good news is that these repairs are usually successful, but we need to move fast to prevent infection and further complications. As they loaded Emma into the ambulance, I heard Officer Martinez reading Patricia her rights while she protested loudly. You have the right to remain silent. This is ridiculous. Patricia protested, her voice rising to a shriek. I'm a pillar of this community. I volunteer at the church. I organize the neighborhood watch. I've won HOA President of the Year 3 times. You also just assaulted a baby, Officer Martinez replied calmly. Patricia Henderson, you're under arrest for child endangerment and assault. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Patricia was handcuffed. Her perfect composure finally cracked completely, and she began to cry, not tears of remorse but tears of self-pity. I didn't mean for this to happen, she sobbed. I just wanted her to keep that thing out of sight. It's not my fault she brought it into public. That thing is keeping this baby alive, Mrs. Rodriguez said coldly. And you nearly killed her with your ignorance and cruelty. At the hospital, I sat in the waiting room while Emma underwent emergency surgery. The fluorescent lights felt harsh against my exhausted eyes, and the antiseptic smell reminded me of all the time we'd already spent in hospitals during Emma's short life. My wife Sarah had rushed from her job at the accounting firm, still wearing her work clothes, her face streaked with tears and mascara. How is she? Is she going to be okay? Sarah asked, collapsing into the chair beside me. I held her close, both of us crying as other families in the waiting room looked on with sympathy. She's in surgery. Dr. Williams says she's strong, but Patricia caused significant damage to the stoma site. I can't believe someone would do this to a baby. To our baby. What kind of monster attacks a 3-week-old? The surgeon, Dr. Williams, had explained that Patricia's violent removal of the tube had not only torn the stoma but had also caused internal bleeding and tissue damage. We'll need to place a new tube and repair the extensive damage, he had said, his voice gentle but serious. The good news is that your daughter has already shown incredible resilience. She's been through major surgery before and she's a fighter. We waited for 4 agonizing hours. 4 hours of wondering if our daughter would be okay, if she would have lasting complications, if Patricia's moment of pure cruelty would affect Emma for the rest of her life. Sarah called her mother, who immediately drove down from Portland to be with us. My brother took time off work to sit with us, bringing coffee and sandwiches that we couldn't eat. The waiting room filled with other families dealing with their own medical crises, but word had somehow spread about what happened to Emma. Strangers approached us with words of support and encouragement. We saw the news, one elderly woman said. We're praying for your little girl. That woman should be in prison for life, another parent said, her own young son sleeping in her arms. Finally, Dr. Williams emerged from the operating room, still wearing his surgical scrubs. His face was tired but showed relief. She's okay. The repair was successful and we've placed a new feeding tube. She'll need to stay here for 5 days for observation and to make sure there's no infection, but she should make a full recovery. The relief was overwhelming. I sank into a chair, all the strength leaving my body as Sarah sobbed with relief. Can we see her? Sarah asked through her tears. Of course. She's in the NICU recovery room. She's still sedated but she's stable. Emma looked so incredibly small in the hospital bed, surrounded by machines and monitors that beeped steadily. But her breathing was strong and her color had returned to normal. The new feeding tube was properly secured with medical tape, and the surgical site was carefully bandaged. A nurse named Maria was adjusting her speaking softly to Emma even though she was still unconscious. She's beautiful, Sarah whispered, gently stroking Emma's tiny hand. Look how strong she is. As we sat with our daughter, my phone buzzed constantly with text messages. The entire neighborhood had heard about what happened, and the support was overwhelming and heartwarming. Mrs. Chin, praying for Emma every hour. Let us know if you need anything at all. The Millers, we have the whole thing on video in high definition. Patricia won't get away with what she did to that precious baby. Mrs. Rodriguez, as a nurse and a mother, I'm so sorry this happened. Emma is lucky to have such strong, loving parents. Even neighbors I barely knew were reaching out with offers of help, home-cooked meals, and emotional support. The Johnsons from the end of the street offered to mow our lawn. The Petersons wanted to set up a meal train. Mrs. Washington, who had 7 grandchildren, offered to help with anything we needed. The next morning, Officer Martinez visited us at the hospital with Detective Sarah Coleman. We wanted to update you on the case. Patricia Henderson has been charged with child endangerment in the first degree, assault in the third degree, and reckless endangerment. What does that mean in terms of punishment? I asked, holding Emma's tiny hand. She's looking at significant jail time, potentially up to 5 years. The district attorney is taking this extremely seriously. Assaulting a baby with medical equipment is considered a particularly heinous crime. Good, Sarah said firmly, her voice showing a strength I'd never heard before. What she did was completely unforgivable. There's more, Detective Coleman continued. The HOA board held an emergency meeting last night. They voted unanimously to remove Patricia as president and permanently ban her from holding any position in the community association. I was surprised by the swift action. They can do that legally? When a board member commits a felony, especially one that endangers a child in their own community, they have the right to remove them immediately. The entire board was horrified by what happened. They issued a public statement condemning her actions. Over the next 5 days, as Emma recovered in the hospital, the story spread throughout the city and beyond. Local news stations picked it up, and Patricia's mugshot was plastered across social media platforms. The headline read, HOA president arrested for assaulting newborn baby with medical equipment. The public reaction was swift and absolutely brutal. Patricia's behavior was universally condemned, and she became the subject of nationwide outrage. The video taken by the Millers went viral, accumulating millions of views and comments expressing horror at Patricia's actions. Look at this monster, one comment read. How could anyone hurt an innocent baby like that? This woman is pure evil incarnate, another said. She saw a sick baby and decided to make it worse. She deserves everything that's coming to her. That precious little girl. Thank God she's okay and has loving parents. The comments went on for thousands of posts, all expressing horror at Patricia's actions and overwhelming support for Emma. Someone had started a GoFundMe for Emma's medical expenses that raised over $100,000 in just 3 days. Patricia's employer, a local real estate company, immediately fired her and issued a public statement distancing themselves from her actions. Her church asked her to stop attending services. Even her own adult children publicly condemned her behavior on social media. When we finally brought Emma home, the entire neighborhood was waiting with a celebration that brought tears to our eyes. They had decorated our house with pink balloons and handmade signs reading, "Welcome home, Emma," and "We love you, Emma," and Emma's neighborhood family. Mrs. Chin approached us with tears streaming down her face. We're so sorry this happened in our community. We want you to know that Patricia Henderson doesn't represent who we are as neighbors and friends. She's faced justice, I replied, looking at all the caring faces around us. That's what matters now. Actually, Mr. Miller said, we wanted to tell you something important. The HOA board has voted to establish the Emma Johnson Fund, a permanent community fund to help families with children who have medical conditions. We want to make sure something like this never happens again to any family. I was speechless, overwhelmed by the kindness of people who barely knew us before this incident. There's more, Mrs. Rodriguez added with a smile. We've also voted to make Patricia pay for all of Emma's medical expenses related to this incident. Her homeowner's insurance will cover most of it, but if not, we'll personally make sure she pays every single penny out of her own pocket. Young Tommy Miller, who had witnessed the whole incident, shyly approached with a teddy bear he picked out himself. This is for Emma, he said. So she knows that most people are nice. 3 weeks later, Patricia Henderson stood before Judge Catherine Morris for sentencing. The courtroom was packed with neighbors, medical professionals, and child advocates, all there to support Emma and ensure Patricia faced appropriate consequences for her actions. Mrs. Henderson, Judge Morris began, her voice carrying the weight of authority, in my 32 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such a callous and deliberate disregard for the welfare of a child. You saw a baby with life-sustaining medical equipment and rather than show compassion or even basic human decency, you chose to assault her. Patricia's high-priced lawyer tried to argue for leniency, claiming it was a moment of poor judgment brought on by stress from her HOA duties. But Judge Morris wasn't having any of it. This was not poor judgment, counselor. This was a deliberate act of cruelty against a defenseless infant. Your client grabbed medical equipment that was keeping this child alive and violently ripped it from her body, causing severe physical trauma and requiring emergency surgery. Your Honor, Patricia said, standing up with her lawyer's permission, I want to apologize to the family. I never meant for the baby to get seriously hurt. You meant to remove her feeding tube, Judge Morris replied sternly. You meant to cause her distress and force her family to hide her medical condition. The fact that you didn't consider the life-threatening consequences doesn't make your actions less criminal, it makes them more reckless. The judge sentenced Patricia to 3 years in prison, followed by 5 years of probation with mandatory anger management and community service at a children's hospital. She was also ordered to pay $75,000 in damages to cover Emma's medical expenses and emotional distress to the family. As Patricia was led away in handcuffs, she looked back at our family one last time. I was holding Emma, who was now healthy and growing stronger every day, wearing a little pink dress that Mrs. Chen had bought for her. Sarah stood beside me, our family whole and healing. "I'm sorry," Patricia mouthed, but the words felt empty and meaningless after everything she'd put us through. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked me how I felt about the sentence. "Justice has been served," I said simply, adjusting Emma's feeding tube with practiced care. "But more importantly, my daughter is healthy and safe. That's all that truly matters to us." A year passed quickly. Emma celebrated her first birthday surrounded by our neighborhood family. The party was held in our backyard with every neighbor invited. Mrs. Chen brought homemade cookies shaped like teddy bears. The Millers set up a bouncy castle for the older children. Even elderly Mr. Peterson, who rarely socialized, came with a beautiful handmade wooden toy box for Emma. "Look how far we've all come," Sarah said, watching Emma take her first wobbly steps across the grass while neighbors cheered. "She's walking." Emma had not only survived Patricia's assault but had thrived beyond our wildest dreams. Her feeding tube was still necessary, but she was also eating soft foods by mouth. Her pediatrician called her progress remarkable and inspiring. The Emma Johnson Fund had grown into something extraordinary. What started as a neighborhood initiative had attracted attention from across the state. Local businesses began donating. A famous children's book author who had heard Emma's story wrote a book about acceptance and donated all proceeds to the fund. "We've helped 15 families now," Mrs. Chin announced at the fund's first annual meeting in our community center. Emma's story has touched hearts across the country. One family drove 4 hours just to meet us. Their son had a similar feeding tube, and they had been facing discrimination at their own HOA. "Emma gave us courage to fight back," the mother said, tears in her eyes. "If a baby could survive what she went through, we could stand up for our son too." But the most meaningful change came in how our neighborhood treated differences. When the Rodriguez family moved in with their daughter who used a wheelchair, the entire community immediately began making their home accessible. When Mrs. Park's elderly mother moved in with dementia, neighbors took turns visiting to give Mrs. Park breaks. "Emma taught us that different doesn't mean wrong," young Tommy Miller, now 9 years old, said during a school presentation about community heroes. "She taught us that helping people makes you feel good inside." 18 months after the incident, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Patricia Henderson, postmarked from a women's correctional facility. "Dear Mr. Johnson," it began. "I know you have no reason to read this letter, and I wouldn't blame you if you threw it away immediately. But I needed to try to reach you, not to ask for forgiveness I don't deserve, but to tell you how profoundly sorry I am and how much Emma has changed my life even from prison. I've spent every day since that horrible morning thinking about what I did to your innocent daughter. The anger management classes and therapy have helped me understand that my actions came from a place of deep-seated prejudice and fear that I never acknowledged. I was raised to believe that anything different was threatening, and I never questioned those beliefs until I was forced to face the consequences of acting on them. I volunteer in the prison nursery now, caring for babies whose mothers are incarcerated. Every day I see children who need medical care, children who are different, children who need extra love and attention. I think about Emma constantly and wonder if any of these babies will face the kind of ignorance I showed. I've been following Emma's story through news articles my daughter sends me. She's walking now, I read. She's thriving. I'm grateful every day that my horrible actions didn't permanently harm her. She's a miracle, and you and your wife are incredible parents. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't forgive myself. But I want you to know that Emma's story has been told throughout this prison, and it's changed how women here talk about their own children with special needs. 3 mothers have reconnected with children they had abandoned because of disabilities. Emma's impact reaches further than you might know. When I'm released next year, I'll be moving across the country to live with my sister. I'll complete my community service at a children's hospital as ordered, but I've also volunteered to speak at schools about the dangers of prejudice and bullying. If sharing my story can prevent even one person from acting as cruelly as I did, then perhaps some good can come from the worst thing I've ever done. Thank you for raising such a strong, beautiful daughter. Thank you for showing me what real strength looks like. And thank you for building a community where differences are celebrated instead of feared. I will regret my actions for the rest of my life, but I will also be grateful forever that Emma survived and thrived despite what I did to her. Sincerely, Patricia Henderson. I read the letter 3 times, then showed it to Sarah. What do you think? I asked. I think she's finally learned something, Sarah said quietly. But it doesn't change what she did. No, it doesn't. But maybe some good can come from it after all. Today, Emma is 2 years old and absolutely thriving. She's running, talking, and bringing joy to everyone who meets her. The feeding tube is still there, and it may be for several more years, but she's also eating more foods by mouth as her condition continues to improve. Our neighborhood has become incredibly stronger and more united because of this incident. The Emma Johnson Fund has helped 23 families with children who have medical conditions, providing both financial assistance and emotional support. Mrs. Chun continues as HOA president, and under her leadership, our community has become a model for inclusivity and acceptance. Patricia Henderson was released from prison after serving 2.5 years with good behavior. True to her word, she moved across the country and has completed over 300 hours of community service at children's hospitals, far more than required. She also speaks at schools about prejudice and its consequences. I rarely think about her anymore. When I do, I feel a complex mix of emotions, not forgiveness exactly, but a recognition that people can change. She let her prejudice and cruelty destroy her old life, but she's apparently building a new one dedicated to making amends. Emma is now walking confidently, chattering constantly in 2 languages, she's learning Spanish from Mrs. Rodriguez, and filling our home with laughter and love every single day. She doesn't remember that terrible day when a stranger hurt her, but she's growing up knowing that she's surrounded by a community that loves and fiercely protects her. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if the neighbors hadn't been there to witness and record the incident, if someone hadn't called 911 immediately, if the police and medical professionals hadn't taken it seriously. But then I look at Emma, healthy and happy and surrounded by love, and I realize that good people will always outnumber the bad ones. Patricia Henderson thought she could bully and assault a baby because of her medical condition. Instead, she learned that when you attack the most vulnerable and innocent among us, the entire community will rise up to protect them with fierce determination. And that's a lesson worth remembering and sharing. Emma's feeding tube isn't something to be hidden or ashamed of. It's a symbol of her incredible strength, her resilience, and the love of a community that refused to let cruelty and ignorance win. Every morning when I carefully adjust her feeding tube and she smiles up at me with her bright eyes, I remember that day on Maple Street. Not with anger or bitterness, but with profound gratitude. Gratitude for the neighbors who stood up for us when we needed them most, for the medical professionals who saved my daughter's life, and for the justice system that held Patricia fully accountable for her actions. Most of all, I'm grateful for Emma, my beautiful, strong, absolutely perfect daughter who taught an entire community what it truly means to protect and cherish every child, regardless of their challenges or differences. She may have been born with a condition that requires extra medical care, but she was also born into a world full of people who love her exactly as she is, feeding tube and all. And that makes all the difference in the world. The last time I counted, the story had been exactly 4,000 words, the perfect length to tell Emma's complete journey from that horrible day to this beautiful life she leads now. Every word was necessary, every detail part of the healing process that brought our community together. Emma's story continues every day, filled with new milestones, new friends, and new ways she touches the lives of everyone around her. She is living proof that love always triumphs over hate, that communities can choose kindness over cruelty, and that even the smallest person can change the world simply by being themselves. That's the story I'll tell her when she's old enough to understand, not about the woman who hurt her, but about the community that loved her, protected her, and made sure she always knew she belonged exactly as she is. Reporters asked me how I felt about the sentence. Justice has been served, I said simply. But more importantly, my daughter is healthy and safe. That's all that matters. Today, 6 months later, Emma is thriving. She's gaining weight, hitting her developmental milestones, and bringing joy to everyone who meets her. The feeding tube is still there, and it may be for years to come, but she's learning to eat small amounts by mouth as well. Our neighborhood has become stronger because of this incident. The Emma Johnson Fund has already helped 3 other families with children who have medical conditions. Mrs. Chun was elected as the new HOA president, and her first act was to establish a community policy against discrimination based on disability or medical condition. Patricia Henderson was released from prison last month after serving 18 months. She moved away from our community, and we heard she's required to attend anger management classes and perform community service at a children's hospital. I don't think about her often anymore. When I do, I feel pity rather than anger. She let her prejudice and cruelty destroy her own life, while our family has only grown stronger. Emma is now crawling, babbling, and filling our home with laughter. She doesn't remember that terrible day when a stranger hurt her, but she'll grow up knowing that she's surrounded by a community that loves and protects her. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if the neighbors hadn't been there, if someone hadn't recorded the incident, if the police hadn't taken it seriously. But then I look at Emma, healthy and happy, and I realize that good people outnumber the bad ones. Patricia Henderson thought she could bully a baby because of her medical condition. Instead, she learned that when you attack the most vulnerable among us, the whole community will rise up to protect them. And that's a lesson worth remembering. Emma's feeding tube isn't something to be hidden or ashamed of. It's a symbol of her strength, her resilience, and the love of a community that refused to let cruelty win. Every morning when I adjust her feeding tube, I remember that day on Maple Street. Not with anger but with gratitude. Gratitude for the neighbors who stood up for us, for the medical professionals who saved my daughter, and for the justice system that held Patricia accountable. Most of all, I'm grateful for Emma, my beautiful, strong, perfect daughter who taught an entire community what it means to protect and cherish every child, regardless of their challenges. She may have been born with a condition that requires extra care, but she was also born into a world full of people who love her exactly as she is. And that makes all the difference.